In a small village nestled along the banks of the Mekong River, there lived a young girl named Lina. Lina was 20 years old, with sparkling eyes and a smile that could light up the darkest of nights. She lived with her mother, Mai, and her little brother, Tien. Their father had passed away when Tien was just a baby, and Mai had worked hard to raise her children on her own. Lina's village was a place of peace and beauty where the people lived in harmony with nature. The fields were green and lush, and the air was filled with the sounds of birds singing and children playing. Despite the hardships, Lina loved her village and her family deeply. One evening, as the sun set over the horizon, casting a golden glow over the village, Lina was playing with her friends by the river. They were laughing and splashing in the water, enjoying the last moments of daylight. As the sky darkened, Lina heard her mother calling her name. Lina, it's time to come home. Mai's voice echoed through the village. Lina waved goodbye to her friends and ran towards her home, her bare feet kicking up dust as she went. She found her mother standing outside their small bamboo hut, her face lined with worry. Lina, I need you to do something very important, Mai said, her voice serious. Lina nodded, her heart beginning to race. What is it, Mama? Mai took a deep breath and placed her hands on Lina's shoulders. I need you to take this basket of food to the old man Quang, who lives at the edge of the village. He hasn't been feeling well, and I promised him some dinner. But be careful, my child. The path to his house can be dangerous at night. Lina felt a shiver run down her spine. She had heard stories about the path to Quang's house. It was said to be haunted by spirits and wild animals, but she knew she had to be brave for her mother. I'll be careful, Mama, I promise, Lina said, taking the basket from her mother's hands. Mai hugged her daughter tightly. Thank you, my brave girl. Now hurry before it gets too dark. With the basket in her hands and her heart pounding in her chest, Lina set off towards Kwang's house. The path was narrow and winding, lined with tall grass and thorny bushes. As she walked, the sounds of the village faded away, replaced by the eerie silence of the night. Lina tried to keep her mind focused on her task, but she couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. The stories she had heard about the path played in her mind, making her jump at every rustle and shadow. As she neared Kwang's house, she saw a flickering light in the distance. It was the old man's lantern, glowing like a beacon in the darkness. Lina quickened her pace, her fear giving way to relief. When she reached the house, she knocked on the door, her knuckles rapping against the wood. After a moment, the door creaked open, and Lina found herself face to face with Kwang. He was an old man, his skin wrinkled and his hair white as snow. Despite his age, his eyes were sharp and piercing. Good evening, Quang, Lina said, her voice trembling slightly. My mother sent me with some food for you. Quang's expression softened and he smiled. Thank you, Lina. Your mother is very kind. Please come in. Lina hesitated for a moment, but then she stepped inside. The house was small and simple, with a few pieces of old furniture and a fire burning in the hearth. Kwang led her to a chair and motioned for her to sit. As Lina sat down, she noticed something strange. There was a large, heavy lock on the bedroom door. She had never seen such a lock before, and it filled her with an uneasy feeling. Kwang must have noticed her staring because he chuckled. Don't worry about that, child. It's just to keep the wind from blowing the door open. Lina nodded, though she wasn't entirely convinced. She handed the basket to Kwang, who thanked her again and began to unpack the food. Would you like to stay for a while? Kwang asked, his voice gentle. I could use some company. Lina considered his offer. It was already dark outside, and the thought of walking back alone scared her. Besides, Kwang seemed kind, and she didn't want to be rude. Okay, she said, smiling. I'll stay for a little while. As Quang busied himself with the food, Lina looked around the room. It was filled with strange and fascinating objects, old books, dusty trinkets, and ancient looking maps. She felt a sense of curiosity and wonder mixed with a lingering unease. After they had eaten, Quang began to tell Lina stories about his life. He spoke of distant lands and long forgotten adventures, of battles fought and treasures found. Lina listened, captivated by his words. She had never heard such stories before, and they filled her imagination with vivid images. Hours passed, and before Lina knew it, it was very late. She stifled a yawn, her eyelids growing heavy. You should stay here for the night, Quang said, his voice kind but firm. It's too dangerous to go back now. Lina's heart skipped a beat. She didn't want to stay, but she knew he was right. The path would be even more perilous in the dark. Okay, she said, trying to hide her fear. I'll stay. Quang smiled and showed her to a small bed in the corner of the room. As Lina lay down, she couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The lock on the bedroom door seemed to stare at her, a silent reminder of her fears. As the night wore on, Lina's unease grew. She tossed and turned, unable to sleep. The room was filled with strange noises, the creaking of the house, the whisper of the wind, and something else, something she couldn't quite identify. Then, just as she was starting to drift off, she heard a noise that made her blood run cold. It was the sound of the bedroom door creaking open. Lina sat up, her heart pounding. She saw Quang standing in the doorway, his face hidden in the shadows. What's wrong, Quang? She asked, her voice trembling. Quang didn't answer. Instead, he stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. The lock clicked into place and Lina felt a wave of panic. Quang, what are you doing? She cried, backing away. The old man didn't speak. He just stood there, his eyes glinting in the darkness. Lina's mind raced. She had to get out, but the door was locked and Quang was blocking her way. She looked around the room, searching for something, anything that could help her. Her eyes fell on a small window, partially hidden by a curtain. It was her only chance. With a burst of adrenaline, Lina leaped from the bed and ran to the window. She tugged at the latch, but it was stuck. Desperation filled her as she struggled to open it. Quang moved closer, his footsteps slow and deliberate. Lina could feel his presence behind her, cold and menacing. Just when she thought all hope was lost, the latch gave way and the window flew open. Lina scrambled through it, her heart pounding in her chest. She tumbled to the ground outside, her hands and knees scraping against the rough earth. Without looking back, she ran. She ran as fast as she could, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The darkness closed in around her, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. Lina's mind was a whirlwind of fear and confusion. What had happened to Quang? Why had he locked her in the room? She didn't know, and she didn't care. All she wanted was to get home, to the safety of her mother's arms. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she saw the lights of her village in the distance. Tears streamed down her face as she stumbled towards them, her legs trembling with exhaustion. When she reached her home, she burst through the door, sobbing uncontrollably. Mai and Tien rushed to her side, their faces filled with concern. Lina, what happened? Mai asked, her voice shaking. Lina tried to speak, but her words were choked by tears. She clung to her mother, her body trembling with fear. It's okay, my child, Mai whispered, holding her close. You're safe now. As Lina cried in her mother's arms, she couldn't shake the feeling of dread. She didn't know what had happened to Quang, but she knew one thing for sure. She would never forget the night the old man didn't let her out of the bedroom. Days passed, and the memory of that night haunted Lina. She couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, and couldn't stop thinking about Quang. Her mother and brother tried to comfort her, but the fear remained. One evening, as the sun set over the village, Mai sat down with Lina, her face lined with worry. Lina, I need to know what happened that night. Mai said gently, you haven't spoken about it, and I can see it's tearing you apart. Lina took a deep breath, her hands trembling. She had tried to push the memories away, but she knew she couldn't hide from them forever. With a shaky voice, she began to recount the events of that fateful night. I went to Quang's house, just like you asked, Lina said, her voice barely above a whisper. He was kind at first. We ate dinner and he told me stories. But then he locked me in the bedroom. Mai's eyes widened in shock. He locked you in the bedroom. Why? Lina shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. I don't know, Mama. He didn't say anything. He just stood there staring at me. I was so scared. Mai pulled Lina into a tight embrace. Oh, my poor child. I'm so sorry. I never should have sent you there. Lina clung to her mother, feeling a mixture of relief and sorrow. She had kept the fear bottled up inside for too long, and finally it was spilling out. We need to find out what happened to Quang, Mai said firmly. We can't let this go unanswered. The next morning, Mai and Lina went to the village elder, a wise woman named Juan. They told her everything that had happened, and Juan listened intently, her brow furrowed in concern. This is troubling indeed, Juan said, her voice grave. Quang has always been a good man, but something must have changed. We need to find out what. Juan gathered a group of villagers, and together they made their way to Quang's house. Lina stayed close to her mother, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and curiosity. When they arrived, the house was eerily quiet. The door was ajar, and the inside looked untouched since Lina had fled. The villagers called out Quang's name, but there was no response. Let's search the house, Juan said, her voice steady. We need to find clues. The villagers spread out, combing through the small house. Lina stayed with her mother, feeling a sense of dread as they moved from room to room. In the bedroom, they found the lock that had trapped Lina. It was heavy and old, covered in strange symbols that none of them recognized. What is this? One of the villagers asked, holding up the lock. Juan examined it closely, her eyes narrowing. This is no ordinary lock. It's enchanted. Lina's heart skipped a beat. Enchanted? What does that mean? It means that someone, possibly Quang, used magic to bind the door, Juan explained. But why? And where is Quang now? As they continued to search, they found more strange objects, an old book filled with mysterious writings, a pouch of herbs, and a carved wooden figure that seemed to radiate a dark energy. We need to take these to the shaman, Juan said, gathering the items. He may be able to tell us more. The villagers agreed, and they made their way to the shaman's hut at the edge of the village. The shaman, a wise old man named Bao, welcomed them with a knowing look. I've been expecting you, Bao said, his voice deep and resonant. I've sensed a disturbance in the village. Juan explained what had happened, and Bao examined the items they had brought. He muttered incantations and waved his hands over them, his eyes closed in concentration. This is dark magic, Bao said finally. Quang must have been trying to protect something or someone. Lina felt a chill run down her spine. Protect someone? Who? Bao's eyes met hers, and she saw a flicker of sadness in them. I don't know, child, but whatever it is, it's powerful. The villagers exchanged worried glances. Dark magic was a dangerous thing, and they didn't know what they were dealing with. "We must find Quang," Bao said firmly. "He holds the answers." But Quang was nowhere to be found. Days turned into weeks, and there was no sign of the old man. The villagers continued to search, but it was as if he had vanished into thin air. Lina tried to return to her normal life, but the fear and uncertainty lingered. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her, waiting in the shadows. One night, as Lina lay in bed, she heard a soft whisper. At first, she thought it was the wind, but then she realized it was a voice calling her name. "Lina." She sat up, her heart pounding. The room was dark, but she could see a faint glow coming from the window. She got out of the bed and walked to the window, her hands trembling. Outside, in the moonlight, she saw a figure standing at the edge of the village. It was Quang. Lina's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to scream, to call for her mother, but something held her back. She felt a strange pull, drawing her towards the old man. She slipped out the house, her bare feet silent on the ground. As she approached Quang, she saw that he looked different. His eyes were no longer sharp and piercing, they were filled with sorrow. "Lina," Quang said softly, his voice trembling. "I'm so sorry." Lina felt a lump form in her throat. "What happened, Quang? Why did you lock me in the bedroom?" Quang sighed, his shoulders sagging. "I was trying to protect you. There is a darkness in this village, a curse that I have been trying to keep at bay, but I failed. The magic consumed me." Lina's eyes widened in shock. "A curse? What curse?" Kwan looked up at the moon, his face etched with sadness. "Long ago, this village was plagued by a powerful spirit. It brought sickness and death, and the people lived in fear. I used my magic to trap the spirit in a wooden figure, and I kept it hidden in my house. But the magic was too strong. It began to corrupt me." Lina felt a chill run down her spine. "The wooden figure, the one we found in your house?" Quang nodded. "Yes, I tried to keep it locked away, but the darkness found a way out. I didn't want to hurt you, Lina. I was trying to protect you from the spirit." Tears welled up in Lina's eyes. "What do we do now?" Quang reached out and took her hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "We must destroy the figure. It's the only way to break the curse." Lina nodded, determination filling her heart. "Let's do it." Together, they returned to Quang's house. The villagers were startled to see Quang, but Lina quickly explained what had happened. Bao and Juan agreed that the figure needed to be destroyed, and they prepared a ritual to banish the spirit once and for all. As the villagers gathered around the bonfire, Bao began to chant in a deep, resonant voice. The figure was placed in the flames, and dark smoke began to rise from it, twisting and writhing like a living thing. Lina watched, her heart pounding. The smoke seemed to form a face, twisted and angry. She could feel the malevolent energy radiating from it, and she gripped Kwang's hand tightly. But the shaman's chants grew louder, and the fire burned brighter. The smoke began to dissipate, and the angry face faded into the night. Finally, with a last desperate scream, the spirit was gone. The villagers cheered, their voices filled with relief and joy. The curse was broken, and the village was safe once more. Quang smiled, a weight lifting from his shoulders. "Thank you, Lina. You have a brave heart." Lina hugged the old man, feeling a sense of peace for the first time in weeks. The darkness had been banished, and the village could finally heal. As the days passed, life in the village returned to normal. The fields were green and lush, and the air was filled with the sounds of birds singing and children playing. Lina felt a sense of happiness and contentment, knowing that the darkness had been defeated. but she would never forget the night the old man didn't let her out of the bedroom. It had been a night of fear and uncertainty, but it had also been a night of courage and strength. Lina had learned that even in the darkest of times, there was always hope. She had faced her fears and overcome them, and she knew that she could face whatever challenges lay ahead. And so, as the sun set over the village, casting a golden glow over the fields, Lina smiled. She was surrounded by the people she loved, and she knew that they would always stand together no matter what.